Jason Major from Sweaty Hero Comic Bargains, and today we're talking about classic Star Trek comics. And so I'm going to talk to you about these four and just a little bit of history of Star Trek, earlier Star Trek comics. So Star Trek, of course, was in 1966 when it premiered on TV. In 1967, that's when Gold Key took up the license. A lot of the early classic Star Treks by Gold Key, because they had not, a lot of the writers had not seen the show, don't even feel like Star Trek. They get some things, they get some little minor things here that are wrong, and it's kind of interesting to see. Later, Star Trek comics would have photo covers. This one has more of a painted cover, pretty cool. And then, like, you have a little photo in the corner here of Kirk and Spock. And they lasted from 1967 to 1979, which I find fascinating because, first of all, it wasn't a monthly book all the time. So sometimes it would be, like this says, it was published in every month except February, March, April, June, and December. So it's probably more like bi-monthly or sometimes even quarterly. And it also was still running when they made the Star Trek animated series, but it didn't start to reflect that animated style. It just continued on from this Star Trek. So it was more a continuation of the original series, and because of the reruns that Star Trek had on TV, that's why they were able to continue it. What's also interesting to me is that Star Trek, it ended the Gold Key run in the late 70s. So this Gold Key comic is actually 1977, and it's Star Trek number 49, which is, as an example. And obviously 1977 was when Star Wars came out. So interestingly enough, after Gold Key lost the license, actually Marvel picked it up pretty soon with the motion picture, which was obviously 1979, and they had Star Trek until 1982. So I'm not sure why, but maybe it was low sales. I'm not sure, but you had writers like J.M. DeMatteis doing Star Trek. This is a really good issue. Let me go back to this issue first. This issue is called The Companion, and it actually has Zefram Cochrane, who people might know from the Star Trek series, as well as Star Trek First Contact, when he was played by James Cromwell. And it is a really cool story about Zefram Cochrane, and they run back into him, and then they have to solve a mystery with cloud beings, and it has some great art too. So this is really cool, and worth an A- for the story. This was also an A-. This was a Star Trek story that felt very much in keeping with the time of the motion picture and with the Black Hole, Disney's Black Hole. I know that's a bad comparison, but a little bit more serious sci-fi, a little bit more grounded sci-fi. I say grounded, but there's a giant robot in this one. There's a cool giant robot in here and a planet-sized thing, but it also has interesting things because it is in the continuity of the motion picture. So you have the costumes that they would have been wearing, so like the plain gray ones that they would have been wearing, and some of the cast members. After motion picture with the Wrath of Khan, you had Star Trek in 1984 was taken by DC Comics, and they did two runs of the classic Star Trek. They also then did a Next Generation series, but the classic Star Trek, and then I don't know why they renumbered it, but I think they renumbered it because they were going to put it on a higher quality paper, and that's when they relaunched it with the new ongoing Next Generation. And then, of course, other publishers have done it since then, including Marvel, again, for Paramount Comics, did some Star Trek. But you had Wildstorm do Star Trek, and IDW do Star Trek. But this story here is by Mike W. Barr, art by Tom Sutton, and this one involves Klingons, and I find it interesting because if you watch Star Trek 2, 3, and 4, I always felt that those stories kind of went back to back to back, and that there wasn't much time in between, but because it was a comic book series, they tried to fill in gaps between 2 and 3, so in this case, spoiler alert, Spock was dead in Star Trek 2, at the end of Star Trek 2, so you have Lieutenant Saavik is in this comic book as the science officer, with Sulu as the first officer. So in this case, they're still on the Enterprise in this book. And then later on, they had to fill the gaps for number 3 and 4, which was really cool too. So I find these kind of really neat untold stories of Star Trek. I was always a big fan of Star Trek. More so, actually, the motion pictures than the original series, ironically enough, because that's what I grew up on, and then Next Generation. But I really like those, like Wrath of Khan, Undiscovered Country, Voyage Home. I love those movies. And so it's really fun to see some of these adventures of Star Trek. So all of these are still in the dollar bin. Even some of the lower grade versions of the Gold Key issues. Now, and if you want them on higher grade, there are higher grade issues of this. But even for high grade DC, the DC ones are you're probably looking at maybe $10 maybe for the first issue, but after that you're probably only going to look at for cover price or up to $5 as of 2024 at least for some of these DC issues in near mint condition. So that's my suggestion: is the Final Frontier of Star Trek comics. See you later.